Calgary Battletech League presents Ellyrians Command Coach, where your host Brett will cover Battletech rules, league strategies, maps, and hints and tricks that can turn a player into a champion.
Welcome everyone to our special How to Play in the Calgary Battletech League intro video. We thought it might be beneficial to make a video that goes through the basics of how we play and showing some of the small things that may differ from rules as written. This should provide a visual aid for some of the things we have put in place to make the games run smoothly.
So strap into your command couch, get your notepad out, and let's get to it. Season games will be laid out with a schedule posted in advance, so you will always know who your next game is against. This will be for the full regular season. Games are to start at 10:30 a.m. at Ogre's Den Gaming Club, so we would request and recommend that you show up around 15 minutes early. This will allow you to greet your opponent, work out if you want to play on a custom map or a standard map, and get any snacks or purchases you want to make out of the way so that you can just play your game and have a good day.
If you have agreed that you're going to play on a custom map, the player who arrived first will roll a d8 to determine which map. Remember, these are more challenging maps as they have environmental aspects to take into account this season. On standard maps, follow the same process of the player who arrived first rolling a d12 to determine the map. Admin will adjust this with either a plus or minus to the roll to get to the next closest available map, if the roll resulted in a map that was already in use. Remember, map selection is done first come, first served, so it pays to be early.
The map should be clear as to how it lines up. This usually is with the hex numbers on both maps at the bottom. However, some may have a terrain feature, like the river on map number 7 that aligns in the middle, that shows a natural flow to how the maps align. Additionally, any of the maps that are printed single-sided will have arrows on the back side to denote which two edges are expected to go together. Each player is expected to show up with 4 clearly identifiable sets of 2 die 6. This will have easy-to-read pips or numbers. Sorry, no custom, faction, or novelty dice this season. Please note, on each BattleMech's record sheet, the color to which the set of dice it will be used for the entire game. As an example, my Wolverine is the green dice, the Crusader is the yellow, the Hunchback is the red dice, and the Atlas will be the black set of dice.
Also, make any notes that you need regarding ammunition, such as running less than full bins of machine gun ammunition or streaks or even LRMs, or if you have 2 tons of cluster and 1 ton of solid slug for your LBX autocannons. Make sure these notes are put in the location where the ammo bin is on the critical hit section of the mech record sheet. You are then going to hand your sheets to your opponent to initial any changes that you've made to these so they are aware of this, and which dice go with the mechs, and as also your skills or any modifications that have been done to the factory model.
Now that everyone is familiar with the maps and the mechs, both players will roll 2d6 for deployment. If you have the bribery skill you do not roll, simply pick which side of the map you want to use as your home edge. If there is no bribery in play, or if both players have bribery, whoever rolls higher on 2d6 will pick which map edge they want and deploy the first unit in the first full hex row along the short edge of the map. This row should have the 17 hexes in it. Players will then alternate 1 unit each until all 8 mechs are deployed in the first full hex row. Remember, only full hexes. Any hex can be used in that row no matter what the elevation or type is, however. Now, wish your opponent good luck as we're about to start the game. At this point in time, the clock should be reading 10:30 a.m. Each turn should be the same steps over and over. So as you play more games and more rounds, you'll get more familiar and comfortable with the process, which will end up speeding up the game overall.
Both players will now roll 2d6 for their lance initiatives, starting with the color dice associated with your lightest mech. Each turn will then rotate to the next mech by weight. For example, this could be a 55-tonner, followed by a 70-tonner, followed by an 80-tonner, followed by a 90-tonner. This means that if nobody loses a mech, the same unit will roll lance initiative every 4 turns. This may matter if certain skills are taken, for example. There is a skill that lets the pilot re-roll initiative when it is their turn in the lance order.
Okay, I rolled a 3 combined and Geoff rolls an 8. So he wins the team initiative and I will end up moving a unit first. Both players will now roll the 4 sets of 2d6 for each of their mechs as noted on the record sheets. Roll all 4 sets together and sort them out numerically in ascending order. Lowest set will be moving first and the highest set will be moving fourth. If any sets come up with the same number, for example, green and yellow both roll 7, black was an 8, and red was a 4, I would then take one of the large red dice, change it to number 1, place it in front of my hunchback to know it moves first. I would then take one of the large black dice, change it to a 4, and set it in front of my atlas to denote it moves fourth and last. I would then take the 2 sets that tied and re-roll them. Yellow and green get picked up and rolled to determine who moves second and third. Only the 2 sets of dice that tied. Your opponent also does the same process.
You will then take your mech sheets and organize them as well. First moving mech on top and last moving mech on the bottom. By placing the large dice beside each of the mechs, both you and your opponent can clearly see at a glance which mechs are to move in which order. This helps both of you strategize your movement for the turn.
Because I lost, I will be moving the hunchback first. Once it is done, I will take a small die and place it in front of or behind my mech with the defensive modifier achieved by movement and the terrain I am standing in. By including the terrain modifier, this helps your opponent not have to try and remember if your mech is in woods or not, for example, and placing the modifier dice behind or in front of your mech will help your opponent keep track of your rear arc for some of the more tricky battle mechs that are faced kind of halfway in between 2 facings. Lots of players will also paint the front and or rear facing of the hex bases for this reason as well. As an example, the front of my hex bases are painted white and the other facings are all painted black. I also like to take a moment on my record sheet to note the turn and how I moved. Turn 4, jump 5 hexes. This helps me keep track of heat as well as what my defensive and shooting modifiers will be later on in the phase.
After Brett moves his first mech, I will then move my first mech. As the arenas are set field of battle, you can only end your movement in a full hex. However, along the edge of the map, you can use a half hex to move through as long as you do not end your movement in it. In this example, you can see that I have moved my Kintaro 3 hexes forward into one of the half hexes. I then spend my 1 point for a turn, and the remainder of my movement to move forward back onto the full hexes and end in the woods. I have moved 5 hex distance, so that's a +2, and ended in the light woods, so that's another +1, so the defensive modifier on the little dice I place will be a 3. Remember, half hexes can be used to move through, but not finish your movement in. The end of the movement phase will have all mechs on the field with a small dice beside them, clearly noting the defensive modifier. A 6 will most likely denote no defensive adjustment at all, unless it's an ultra-fast mech, which you may need to use a small D10 for instead.
In the video, we have skipped ahead a few turns, so it is easier to show the complexities that can come up in the later phases.
On screen, you can see that I have moved my Kintaro so that my back is facing the edge of the map. Brett can then turn his hunchback 1 hex to the left and run straight forward 5 hexes. This sends his mech off the map board in what would be referred to as a ghost hex. This is only possible because the edge of the map cannot be used to protect a section of your mech. Mechs that are moved off the map voluntarily or involuntarily are not considered destroyed, but they must move back onto a full hex next turn as long as the situation does not exist that creates a ghost hex. You can see in this situation has also generated a ghost hex for the Banshee to move in behind the Hunchback. Normally, this half hex is not usable as a final hex to end movement, but the rear arc of the Hunchback is making it a valid hex this time.
After movement is completed, both players will record weapon fire, either on the back of your record sheets or on a separate tracking sheet if that is what you prefer. It is important to record all your shots before any dice are rolled. Mechs shoot in the inverse order that they moved in. This seems complicated, but it is rather simple, because we organized our sheets for who moves first earlier. If you flip the entire pile over, the back sheet will be the one that shoots first. Please record your weapon fire, target numbers, the unit you are shooting at clearly. Flip the sheet over once recorded. Do the same for the other units that are still active.
Both players will denote all weapons fire before any of the dice are rolled. Example, my LBX fires a cluster round at the Atlas with a base gunnery of 4. It's at short range. He walked for a +1. He has a defensive modifier of 2, an intervening tree hex of another +1, and then -1 for the cluster rounds, so he needs 7 to hit. Once all fire has been declared, the player who lost initiative will fire all 4 units first. Make all your to-hit rolls, then roll all your damage rolls for each mech. Then move on to the next unit by flipping the page. Once player A is done shooting, player B will roll all their attacks and damage will be recorded. Remember, all fire is done simultaneously, so anything that dies still gets to fire this turn. However, if something that you shot at and declared dies from multiple units fire, you do not get to redirect any of that fire. In the spirit of speeding up the game, you also don't need to roll to hit for weapons fire at a mech that is already being destroyed. The only thing that you need to roll for is things like a jam, like a rack or autocannon, or if a streak would launch where you need to record the missile and heat consumption.
Overkill is better than underkill, but you don't need to waste time rolling dice that do not matter or impact the game.
Alright, next up, rolling groups of weapons together. Sometimes it is more efficient to roll a group of weapons together, and this is acceptable for the most part. If your mech has 4 medium lasers, first make sure your opponent is aware of what you are about to roll for, what the target numbers are, and how many you are rolling. You can then roll all 4 sets of dice together to roll your to-hit numbers. For damage, this is basically the same thing. If you hit with 3 medium lasers and 9 missiles from an LRM and 4 streak SRMs, for example, you could then roll all 4 sets of dice for the 3 medium lasers and the 1 group 5-point group from the LRMs. You would then roll a 4-point damage cluster from the LRM, finishing off the damage from that weapon. Then you could roll 4 sets of dice for the 4 streak missiles that hit. 6 sets of dice should be the maximum rolled at any time so that both you and your opponent can keep track of the rolls.
Both players will then make any needed piloting skill checks to stay standing. If someone fails, roll 1d6 for direction of the fall, then 2d6 to avoid pilot damage, followed by a 2d6 consciousness check if needed. Then resolve damage as per normal. Throughout the game, we want you recording your weapons fire. This cannot be stressed enough. Record your fire every turn. You can either use the dedicated tracking sheets, which a lot of people will, or the back of your mech sheets, but record your shots.
Now on to physical attacks, if any can be made. This is also a good time to double check that both you and your opponent are recording heat and ammo. Remember, mark each ammo usage beside the critical slot where the ammo bin is located in case that ammo bit is hit. If this is not being done, it will be assumed that a full bin of ammo is there when damage is taken. Also, the highest recorded heat level on the mech will be considered in effect if there is ever a question, so please be sure to accurately adjust your heat numbers each turn.
When a mech dies, please make sure to note the location with a rubble hex marker or other token. If you do not have any, there will be some available for League use. This is important because dead mechs leave rubble behind, +1 movement penalty, and a piloting skill roll to enter any hex with rubble, in addition to the normal costs.
Now, with the Kintaro dead, there's nothing generating a ghost hex anymore for the Hunchback on the map. This means the Hunchback must re-enter a full hex when initiative comes up in play, even if the Banshee has not yet gone. The Banshee is not a valid hex, so it will also be required to move into a valid hex or a ghost hex if the Hunchback provides it with one. This will take us to an uneven number of mechs on the field. Lance initiative is still rolled as normal, however, because I only have 3 units, I will only roll 3 sets for the initiative, and any ties will be done as normal.
I lost initiative, so I moved the Atlas first. Because he is elevated on a hill, there is no need to move this turn. I placed my defensive die down with a 6 to denote a 0 modifier. Then Geoff will move his first unit, the Banshee, which is currently in a half hex. Because there is no longer a valid hex to be in, he must move to a full hex on the map board.
So my Banshee moves for 1 point with the turn, 1 for the hex, 1 for the rubble, and a piloting check, which I get a success, which means I have 1 more open hex and only 1 for the light wooded hex because this pilot has Pathfinder, which allows you to ignore 1 point of movement when entering up to 3 separate wooded hexes in a turn.
Here is an example where the Hunchback from the prior fight lost a leg instead. The Kintaro and Banshee have both moved away. Because the Hunchback cannot move on its own and nothing is generating the ghost hex any longer, the mech will automatically be moved to the closest full hex on the map. If it still had both legs, it would be required to attempt to stand as long as the target number is 12 or lower, and then re-enter the battlefield on its own. If it attempts to stand and fails with no movement remaining, it will be auto-moved to the full hex with the same facing as if it was not able to stand at all. This mandatory stand attempt could result in the mech or pilot being destroyed.
All right, folks. Thanks for tuning in for another episode here on the Calgary Battletech League podcasts. As you've seen, this is just being a quick and dirty way for you to get some info on some of the small changes and small things that we've done in the league to enhance play and make the games hopefully a little more enjoyable and quicker. Stay tuned for following stuff, and we'll see you next time on the podcast.
Thanks again for tuning in, everybody. And be sure for the league members, read your packet, watch the video, ask questions that you have. We're here to try and help make everything smoother for you, and we want everybody to have an enjoyable time playing Battletech going forward. Thanks again. Have a good night.